Okay, good morning to this meeting of the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee. I am Leo Madden. I'm the chair of the committee. A bit of housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you sign into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. A live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be webcast. Can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. The members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Okay, so what we'll do, I'll go around the table for introductions, if that's all right. Could I start with you, Stuart, please?
Good morning, Councillor Stuart Brown.
Councillor Graham Heaney, if the meeting goes on after 12:15, I'll have to leave because I have a seminar to give at 12 o'clock.
I'll have to leave as well.
Councillor Benedict Swan, Anchorage Park and Copner, and I also have a meeting at 12 o'clock, so I will need to leave if it runs on.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
Helen Dickerson, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care.
Charlotte Smith, Assistant Director of Corporate Services.
David White, External Audit Manager for Ernst & Young.
Romana Rafiqul Amin, Assistant Manager at Ernst & Young.
Steve Belshaw, Group Accountant in the Technical and Financial Planning Team.
Helen Clem, Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Councillor Daniel Weems-Hilsey.
Councillor Emily Stradwick, Hilsey Ward.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Okay, thank you all very much for those introductions. I'm going to continue the meeting, but what I will do after we've done the minutes is to move item 8, which is the internal audit report, up because there is an appendix, as you see, from the Director of Social Services, Adult Social Services, sorry Andy, so Andy Biddle's here. I don't want to detain him unnecessarily. If there are any questions on it, all I asked Andy was that you be on standby so that we call you, so thanks very much for turning up. Can we now move on to item 2, declarations of interest, members? Any? None? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting are held on the 22nd of November. I'll go through those for accuracy and matters arising, and that's okay. And I'll do the big page numbers rather than the small page numbers, okay. So page 7. Just on 48, Lizzie, we'd put these down just to remind ourselves that there'll be reports back on them. That will still happen, so we'll keep them on the agenda. Okay, thank you. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Okay, members, happy with those to be signed as a matter of true record? Thank you. Thank you. Can we now move on to item 8, please? We'll do the whole item, obviously, right? So I'll leave it to you, Lizzie, and then Andy, come in as necessary. Thanks.
Thank you. The report is our standard report, giving you an update on work that we've completed since the last reporting period. And it's also to give an indication as to whether we're due to complete the work within the required timescale. All indication is at present is that yes, we would be able to do that. We have had some recent vacancies, but we are realigning items of work to be able to finish. In relation to the work that we've completed since the last reporting period, I would like to flag just a couple for you. Just for clarity, on page 102, you will note that follow-up work on direct payments children's has moved from a no assurance to limited. we had previously brought to this committee the details of the exceptions that were raised. Work is ongoing. This is the first time that we have performed a follow-up in that area, and the fundamental issue is that direct payments on the children's side and on the adult side are required to be verified. It's deemed as a direct payment audit and it is performed within the services. The fundamental issue in relation to children's is that that had not been being performed. There is a new framework in place. So at present it's still at limited, but we will come back in the next financial year and give you a further update. The other area as well, potentially to flag to you, is on page 104, which is the health and safety, corporate health and safety. There is obviously a new recording system for the training that has delayed the implementation of some of the actions, and there has also been some issues regarding staffing, which again has delayed. Beyond that, Chair, on page 106, it is flagged in relation to direct payments adults, where we have performed a second follow-up review. There are still some areas that are outstanding, but there has been significant progress. But as directed by this committee, if we have something that is still unresolved, we are to escalate, and that has been escalated, which is hence why Andy has drafted a supplementary paper detailing the work that has been performed. We liaise very closely with Andy and his team. So from an audit perspective, whilst there is delays, we are satisfied that they are making the inroads that they need to make. There is a wider project which I will leave to Mr. Biddle, if required, to explain further.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Lizzie. Could I just, the one question I have on that, because it's both adults and children's, I don't know, do we call them clients, customers, whatever I read is a different thing, but are people who are in receipt of direct payment, are they actually getting the correct money, or could there be problems, could there be underpayments or overpayments?
That there could, in theory, be underpayments, overpayments, because obviously there is an assessment as to what their needs are, which is what the financial package is based on. If their needs change, then obviously their payment would need to flex. The requirement for the audit is to be able to demonstrate that the individuals have used those funds for the intended purposes.
Okay, well, maybe you can pick that up, Andy, then in a minute. Sorry, any questions of the report of the Adult Social Care? Or comments? No, okay, thank you. Sorry, Scott Peter Harris just come in. Good morning, member of the public. Andy, could you elaborate on the paper and particularly give some assurances around getting it all sorted out? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So as you'll see from the paper, and I'll take it as read, we've had a number of issues picked up by internal audit colleagues on both the initial audit and then the two follow-ups. I think it's fair to say that we're not where we want to be, but we had identified this internally as a significant project that we're going to complete in this calendar year. There's been quite a significant amount of training offered to our staff. There's been some work on rewriting documentation to make it clear as to how the process works with direct payments. We do use almost exclusively now a prepaid card to use direct payments for people, so under and overspends can be addressed through that method quite quickly. And we also use an external payroll provider if people are employing people through their direct payments. So there's an additional level of check and balance through that mechanism. We are intending to continue with the audits that we conduct as Adult Social Care, and we'll obviously be having a follow-up with our internal audit colleagues. And those have started, those are embedded, but I think there's an issue with keeping records of those for us to assure ourselves that they're happening. We know they're happening because we're discussing them, but we need to see much clearer recording from our management colleagues that those are happening. And we're going to move those into a quarterly review through our governance process. We're also going to take the outstanding recommendations from the internal audit process around direct payments to frame the agenda for that governance process on a quarterly basis. So we will quite literally be comparing the information we're seeing against those issues that still have limited assurance to them. As I say, we anticipate the project should be complete in this calendar year. There is a wider implication of that around what people are able to buy with their direct payments in Portsmouth. We have standardised services in terms of domiciliary care. We have some services through voluntary and community sector, but we also need to do a piece of work on commissioning. So there's a wider choice of things for people to buy to get the support that they need, and that will continue through into 25. It'll start in this calendar year, but it will continue into the next calendar year. Hopefully that's a reasonable summary, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Any question, members? Comments? Oh, sorry. Councillor Heaney-Graham.
I do have one. I mean, on the section 1.3 of your report, you talk about support planning, and then allowable expenditure was not always clear. Is that because there is discretion involved in what can be applied for or charged for, or is it that people are just not following the required list, if you like?
I think it's a bit of both, but I think on that particular point, it's ensuring that what it says on the support plan is what is being paid to the individual. And I think that's a question of updating and reviewing, which was picked up through the internal audit. So it's ensuring that we are reviewing those on a regular basis and updating our paperwork. We have had an issue with reviews. We've had a capacity issue with reviewing of care. As is mentioned, I think, in the original audit report, there's a statutory obligation to review within 12 months for adult social care in England. And we've had difficulty with ensuring all of those happen, which has purely been a capacity issue around the staff that we have. So I think it's a discrepancy between what's on the support plan and then what's in payment. I don't think there's anything wrong with what's in payment in the vast majority of cases, but I think it's about making sure the paperwork's as up to date as it can be.
I did have a second question as well. Point 5 talks about financial information not always consistent across the systems. Is that because the systems don't talk to each other, or because there's different information being input and therefore it's confusing?
It's a reconciliation, so it's ensuring that the information goes from what we call the client record, which is a system called System 1, into the financial record, which is Controc. So again, it's an issue of consistency and ensuring that happens.
Okay, members, any other points, questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we're asked, members note the audit performance for 23-24 to the 8th of January this year, and that members note the highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed from the 23-24 audit plan, including follow-up work performed. Is that agreed, members? Thank you very much. So we're now back to item 4, which is the 22-23 Statement of Accounts and Audit Update. Richard.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. This is a very short paper just to give you an update on the status of the City Council's 22-23 Statement of Accounts and the related audit activity. I don't intend to go through the paper, but there is just one further update I wanted to provide, which is that very recently the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities have confirmed that they are issuing proposals to for local authorities and auditors to have the Statement of Accounts for up to and including financial year 22-23 completed by the 30th of September 2024. So that's due to go out to consultation, and we're waiting further guidance, but that's their current intention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Any questions on Parliament members? Please. No, please, Graham.
I was interested to read this report because it talks about a backlog in local authority audits, and you'll be aware that some years ago the government abolished the Audit Commission, which had large responsibility for doing that. I mean, is the problem that there isn't enough capacity in the system of auditing to do all of this, or the local authorities don't pay enough, or what's causing delay? Why is there such a delay and so many local authorities aren't able to? Are you able to answer that question or not?
I'm probably not best placed to answer that question. But there, as the report's highlighted, there is a national recognition of that backlog and delay, and there are proposals being put forward, as I've just highlighted, by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to address that backlog and try and get the audits back onto sort of a regular, more current and up-to-date position. So, and their proposal to do that is to require all accounts to be completed up to the 30th of September 2024.
Maybe I'll ask that question somewhere else.
Well, yeah, Chair, I don't know, do you want to come in now, David, or wait to your next item? The next item, which is you.
I don't mind just sort of chipping in a couple of thoughts on that one if it's helpful. So yeah, it is a combination of factors, and the impacting the sort of external audit sector as a whole in local government. Resourcing issues are an ongoing challenge. The retention and recruitment of suitably qualified people to audit local authority accounts, because they are quite specialised in the sense of some of the content of those accounts, and that's been an ongoing challenge for a number of years across all of the audit firms, and and EY included. COVID, I know that sounds, it's like a sort of a bit of a trope at this point, but COVID did have a very significant impact, which has caused delays, which have then proved difficult to sort of rein back. And on the report that we'll be presenting shortly, there have been some particular issues on the, in the period of time that the 21-22 audit was ongoing, particularly around infrastructure assets and the pensions training evaluation that we spoke about at the September meeting, which have caused sort of yet further kind of delays in the audit process for that year in particular. So as Richard says, that there are moves afoot to try to address this backlog and to get back to a point where the audit reporting is on the current year, and therefore as useful and timely as it possibly can be.
Okay. Okay. Item 4 then, members. Can we note the report? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Okay, move on to item 5, which is Portsmouth City Council Audit Results Report year ended 31 of March 2022. It wouldn't be Governor's Audit unless we had a massive report of some kind, but thank you for that, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, apologies. There is a certain amount of mandated content in the report which lengthens it somewhat. So yes, you say our report today is our final audit results report for the year 21-22, which, following on from the previous discussion we've just been having, we do fully appreciate is now somewhat historic. And as I say, we have spoken just previously and at a previous meeting to some degree about the issues that have led to that situation arising. We would like to thank the officers for their help and patience throughout the audit process, which has been, as I say, elongated. And there are a number of areas of the audit where the bar is sort of ever rising in terms of the amount of audit evidence which is required for us to then form a conclusion and to meet regulatory requirements. As I say, we are very grateful for the efforts and patience of officers, and Steve in particular, for his ongoing help throughout. I'll just briefly go through the executive summary, which is the first section of the report and starts on page 19 per the big page numbers, and then Romana will briefly go through the section on audit risk, section 2 and section 4, where we identify the audit differences that we're bringing to your attention. So in summary, the audit is now finally there, completed. We've been at a point where we've been at the point of being able to sign off for a little while, but obviously need to bring the report to the committee, and then we can get the documentation signed, and then we hopefully would be able to sign on our side before the end of January. The intention is to issue an unqualified report on the statement of accounts, and there are a very small number of items listed on page 19 that we just need to do once we've got the signed paperwork to complete the process. If we move on to page 20, in terms of our value for money responsibilities, no significant weaknesses were identified in terms of the council's arrangements, and therefore we have no matters to bring to your attention in respect to value for money, and the auditor's report will reflect that. There are a small number of audit differences which Romana will talk through when I hand over to her in a sec. And then on page 21, we're required to undertake certain work on the Council's annual governance statement and narrative statement, and on the whole of government accounts submission. We have no matters to report in any of those areas. There is a possibility that the NAO will ask us to undertake further procedures on the whole of government accounts. That's the same situation as it was in the prior year. We await their steer on that. So that will mean that we can't issue the audit certificate at this time, but the audit opinion, which is the key part, will be possible to be issued. A couple of sort of control and process issues drawn out in section 7 of the report. And there are no matters to bring to your attention in regards of our independence from the Council. The rest of the executive summary is looking at the areas of audit focus and audit risk. So at this point, I'll hand over to Romana to go through section 2 of the report, which covers those in a bit more detail.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. So just to summarize section 2, there are 3 fraud risks, 3 significant risks, and 6 other areas of audit focus that we had during the 21-22 audit. I will not go over the details of each risk because I think most of this has been communicated and explained in detail where necessary over the last few committees. But I will focus on the conclusion that we reach for each area of audit focus and whether we have any matters to report. And where we do have any matters to report, I will explain them in more detail when we get to section 4 of our report. So starting with the first fraud risk, this is related to misstatements due to fraud or error. So we have, in summary, performed our planned program of work and we have no matters to report here. And then moving on to page 26, the next risk is the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition through inappropriate capitalization of revenue expenditure. Again, we have performed our planned work program and we have no matters to report here. Moving to page 27, the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition again, but through inappropriate recognition of trading and investment property income. We have performed our planned program of work and we have no matters to report here. The next page is starting with the first significant risk, the valuation of Lakeside North Harbour assets. We have performed our planned program of work here and we have nothing to report here either. And then the next risk is the risk around valuation of investment property and land and buildings, specifically valued using the existing use value and fair value methods. We have performed our planned program of work and we have identified an audit difference here, and I will explain that in more detail when we get to section 4 of this report. The next risk is around infrastructure asset valuations. So we have performed the planned program of work and we have nothing to report here. And then moving to page 33, this is again around the valuation of land and buildings, but this is valued using the depreciated replacement cost method, and also the valuation of housing revenue account properties. So with regards to HRA properties, we have no matters to report, but with the valuation of land and buildings using the DRC method, we did identify 2 audit differences, but I will explain those in detail in section 4. And then in page 35, we have the pension liability valuation where we performed the planned program of work, but we have no matters to report here. For the next risk around accounting for COVID-19 related government grants, again, no matters to report here. And then page 37, the risk around group accounts assessment, we have performed the work we plan to do and there is no matter to report here. Page 38, restatement of comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the expenditure and funding analysis and other related disclosure notes. So again, we have performed the planned program of work and we have nothing to report here. And then the final area of audit focus on page 39 is around the new ledger system that was implemented during 21-22. We have performed the planned program of work, and we have no matters to report here. So if we move to section 4 of this report, which is on page 46, I will explain the audit differences that we've identified. So before I explain the actual differences, which are all related to property valuations, I'd just like to set out some context around this. The audit of the valuation of properties requires key inputs to be verified to source data, and this has proved difficult to do as the valuation documents that were provided to us did not contain references to some of the supporting info. We realize that these issues have been exacerbated by turnover in the valuations team, which is outside of management's control. This area of the audit has taken extensive effort to perform and conclude, with some samples being revisited on multiple occasions. But I would like to take this opportunity to just echo what David said. I'd like to thank the finance team, specifically Steve and Anne Keynes from the valuations team, for their continued patience and effort to deliver alternative info in the absence of proper evidence to support these valuations. And we are aware that the council has put measures in place to prevent a reoccurrence of this going forward. So coming to the audit differences, we have identified 3 main audit differences, 1 being factual and 2 being projected, and management have chosen not to adjust these differences. They are not material individually or aggregate, so we are satisfied that property valuations will not be materially misstated if these remain unadjusted. And starting with the factual differences, just to give a bit of background, these are errors that arise from the work we do on key valuation items. These are usually items of significant value that warrant separate reporting from the rest of property valuations. And the one factual error that we identified, it relates specifically to valuations using the depreciated replacement cost method. We have mentioned different types of errors under this heading, such as the wrong application of obsolescence and depreciation and lack of external works allowance. But the combined error here is an understatement of assets by 4.3 million on the balance sheet. Then moving to projected differences, these are errors that arise from the work we do on a sample basis. So the samples we test are meant to be representative of the wider population, and any errors that we identify in these samples are projected over the untested population to estimate the total misstatement that could exist in this population. The first projected difference here stems from the same type of errors identified under factual differences, but the main difference here under projected differences is that it's an estimation rather than an actual error that we identified. The combined error here is an understatement of assets by 5.1 million on the balance sheet. The second projected difference here arises from our work on a different method of valuations, which is the existing use value method. The result, this difference here is the result of an error identified in one sample. The value of the sample error itself is immaterial, but when we project it over the untested population, it amounts to an overstatement of assets by 2.5 million on the balance sheet. But yeah, I think that summarizes all of the audit differences, and I'll hand back to David now. Thank you.
So I think in summary, as Romana's covered there in some detail, there are a lot of areas which we identified as risks to the audit, and we've only really got reporting points in a small number of those, which I think in an overall sense gives us assurance over the overall quality of the council's financial statements, as we have no matters to report across the vast majority of those risk areas. The one point around the pensions liability arises from what we discussed in September with the new triennial valuation, and that's not an audit error. It's an adjustment to the accounts after the balance sheet date because of new information that's come to light since. and that's actually reduced the council's pension liability by a fairly sizable amount. So that's probably all we would want to say, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you both very much. Could I just start with the a fraud risk, because it's something we've taken up, and I don't have sleepless nights over it, David, but I do wonder, I think if people are going to get away with it, they're going to get away with it, and I just wonder if, I brought this up in the past with internal audit, are you happy that what the system we have in force actually would detect fraud anywhere in the organisation rather quickly, or, you know, I think there's a bit in here about managers, senior people. If all the senior people got together and decided to defraud, whatever, you know, would that come forward almost immediately, or do we worry too much about fraud?
So I think from our perspective, we're concerned with the frauds which could, you know, materially impact the statement of accounts. So we're talking about amounts, you know, around sort of 9-10 million. So, you know, and ultimately the responsibility for putting in place measures and controls and checks and balances to mitigate the risk of fraud lies with the council. But from our perspective, we're satisfied that there are appropriate measures in place to prevent the statement of accounts being materially misstated as a result of fraud.
Just on the people want to come in, I'll just finish my little bit. You do have so you've mentioned significant fraud, but actually imprinted on the page 29 and 31 is significant risk. Now, how does that get itself resolved, or does it get resolved? Will the final audit have those two words on those two pages? I think there's another page somewhere.
So that's really just a point of sort of auditing standard terminology, in the sense that any fraud risk is just automatically what we would deem to be a significant risk to the accounts, and that is just a presumption under the auditing standard. So it's not to say that that is anything which is particularly specific to Portsmouth City Council. I suppose it's that arises, as I say, from the auditing standards that we have to apply.
One question. If we go into page 47, and there are differences between yourselves and management in the council, but it was on the wrong application, obsolescence and depreciation. Is there a formula for that, or do we have to get outside consultants, and how do you resolve that disagreement that you might have, or difference of opinion?
So I think that there are elements of the valuations which are inherently judgmental, and so we may have, you know, a difference in judgment between what the council's valuer has done and our judgment, or our judgment as informed by our specialists on the EY side. I think in terms of the obsolescence point, which Romana can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think was one of the main things that's given rise to those differences, that's simply a formula issue, and in the sense that the valuation calculation should be performed in a certain stepped order, and that obsolescence calculation had been sort of done in the wrong place, such that it therefore produced the wrong result at the end of the valuation calculation, as opposed to being anything that was judgmental in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Any points or questions, members? Yeah, Councillor Heaney-Brown.
It's getting my head around this bit about the valuations on page 47. I suppose what we want to know is, what is the material effect of this? I mean, if I've read this correctly, you've talked about on page 47 where it says projected division of land and buildings, existing valuations, difference from the incorrect rent figures used in calculation. And we appear to have a credit figure there, i.e. we've undervalued the actual rent, if I've understood it correctly. So in a sense, that's maybe not such a much of a bad thing, because but it would be maybe more serious if we'd assessed what we might be getting out of that, because that affects our rental income, etc. So what's the material effect of this on the council?
So actually, it's the other way around. So the entries that are shown on page 47 are effectively what would need to be put through the accounts to correct these differences, you know, leaving aside whether correct is quite the right term to use for something that's inherently judgmental, and the fact that some of those differences are projected, but if they were to be adjusted in the accounts. So actually, were these differences to have been adjusted, the council's asset value on the balance sheet would have increased by the bottom line figure there. So there is, effectively it's saying that the combined effect of these is that there is no risk of the council having overstated its assets on the balance sheet.
Thank you. Are you finished? Are you going to? Oh, right. Okay. I thought you were going to carry
Unless
on
you
with
have
the
any
bits,
further
the bits and
questions.
pieces. Well, I was going to ask a general one on COVID, because I think, we've dealt with this within the internal audit bits in the past, but I think the councils were under great pressure at the time to get money out to those that needed it. And there seems to be, and mistakes may well have been made, and we haven't seen any report on that. But is there, I don't know that you're given any sort of leeway in relation to audit, the audit of the COVID procedures and what we did with it, because of the significance in getting things done quickly, and therefore errors might have been made.
I think, so from our perspective, the work we did around the COVID grants was mainly around whether they were treated appropriately in the statement of accounts, depending on whether the council was acting as an agent or principal for how that money was passed out to businesses or individuals in the local community. And we didn't identify any issues with that. Our wider procedures around frauds would have looked at, whether there were any issues impacting grants, but again, that if frauds are being perpetrated externally by third parties upon the council, that's not necessarily something that would come out of the work that we do, and I think it would probably be more one for our internal audit colleagues to have looked at. But we've not identified any particular issues in that sense from any of the work that we've done. We did also look at the application of COVID grants in the previous year's audit for 2021, when all of that was sort of even more of a pressing issue.
Okay, thank you. Lucy?
At the back end of certain financial years during the COVID period, internal audit did extensive testing on grants that were paid. Any areas, irrespective of whether it was a grant, whether it was COVID related, if we had identified a fraud, we're duty bound to flag with the external auditors. And I know there were a couple which were raised at a national level because at the time as well, the government requested that, and forgive me because I can't remember the name of the body, but there was a national police crime agency that came together, and if there was any concerns, local authorities had to submit their concerns through to this national body solely to deal with any investigations and see things through. I think off the top of my head there was approximately 5. They would not have been six-figure sums. We reported them direct to the national body so that they could take national prosecutions for, because inevitably the COVID period, where there was a fraud that had occurred, it was organised national gangs that were perpetrating the frauds. So I would have fed back to external audit. There was nothing significant, and we would have fed back, as I said, to this national body. And I think I recall probably, Councillor Madden, a couple of years ago, I think we had a small element that was in one of our progress reports that painted a similar type picture from recollection, just to give you some assurances there.
And so I think from, just following up what Lizzie says, from our perspective, therefore, the value of any frauds would have been immaterial to the statement of accounts, and, we would have sort of taken them into account on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Now, I haven't, I had to read this one online, but when I was reading it, one thing that jumped out at me, I think it was near the end, but I'm afraid I can't find it. But whether this council could be bankrupted or not is in there somewhere. But is that a general thing? Yeah, you couldn't give a guarantee that it wouldn't happen. But is that what audits are doing across the country, making in all your external audits, saying that in the report? I don't know to cover yourselves or not, David. I don't know what it is, but is that something that's common?
So as part of the audit opinion, we're required to give a view as to whether the council is a going concern. And so effectively, we'll continue in operation for the 12 months from the date that the audit opinion is signed. It may be that you've seen there. So as I say, that's a requirement for all audits. And so we do work to look at the council's cash position, its balance sheet position, its cash forecasting for the forthcoming period. We've not identified any issues in that regard with respect to Portsmouth. There's a statutory presumption that all local authorities are a going concern. So it's not quite the same as doing that work on a private company. But that said, as you say, undertaking that work and our value for money work at other authorities, we will have highlighted in audit reports elsewhere concerns in those areas, notwithstanding that statutory presumption. And as you'd be aware, there are quite a number of local authorities across the country flagging the possibility of what's called a Section 114 notice, where they don't think they'll be able to balance their budget for the forthcoming period, which is, I suppose, in a local government context, sort of as close as an authority gets to, a going concern issue.
Yeah, I guess that was the situation, Dave, but thank you for that. Just one last question from me. Within the report itself, I'm sorry, I usually highlight it, but I haven't done it this time. There are some differences between management and yourselves on valuations or whatever. How do they get resolved, or do they get resolved, or do you just agree to disagree?
So to the extent that the audit differences that arise are not material, we can agree to disagree. And so those differences that Romana talked through will remain, so that those items are not proposed to be adjusted in the final version of the statement of accounts, but that won't affect the auditor's report because they are not material. We have had instances where the work we've done on valuations this year and in the prior year identified certain specific points where we've then discussed those further with management and the valuations team, and there has been agreement that there would be changes to aspects of the valuation process. So there is, we do have a good process for discussing the matters that arise with management and agreeing how to take them forward in future years wherever we can. But as I say, there is an element of being able to agree to disagree where it's not materially impacting the accounts.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I thank you for the report? Very readable, I have to say, and well presented. And I didn't fall asleep over it. Let's say that. And and quite coaching, whatever. So I do thank you for the report itself. I know it's come back to a while. We do appreciate the reasons for that. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
So members, we just have to, can we note this report? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on to item 6, corporate complaints, policy update? Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, so I'll just briefly give you a bit of an introduction. Unusually, there's been quite a lot of external activity around the way local authorities manage their complaints. So we wanted to give you an update on what's happening in that external environment and explain the impact on our own corporate complaints policy and process. We put the policy together, the one that we have now, in 2021, and we built into that a review schedule for it to say we would come back and review the policy every 2 years to make sure it remains fit for purpose and right for our customers and so on, which means we were due to review the policy in December 2023. However, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman and the Housing Ombudsman started a consultation towards the end of last year on plans to create a joint statutory code for complaints, so to put the code of best practice onto a statutory footing, and to combine the codes between the two ombudsmans, if that's the plural. As a result of that, we put the review of our own policy on hold until we have the outcome of the consultation, because we didn't want to review and update the policy twice in 12 months. That didn't seem very sensible. We don't currently have a date from the Ombudsman on the outcome from the consultation. It has closed, but their website simply says that the outcome will be available in due course. So once we have a date for the outcome, we'll schedule our own corporate complaints policy review. I checked today, still says in due course. In the meantime, we're going to do some work to engage with our own customers on their experience of the complaints policy so that we're able to feed some actual customer feedback into the review. But we do need to make one amend to the corporate complaints policy in the interim. And that's because, although there's an ongoing consultation and review around a joint statutory code, the Social Housing Regulation Act of 2023, which places the Housing Ombudsman's Code onto the statutory footing, regardless of the consultation, means that from the 1st of April 2024, the council will have to handle landlord complaints in accordance with the code. So we haven't been told whether or not local government complaints that are not landlord complaints will have to be handled in accordance with the code, or indeed what the code will say, but our housing colleagues have been told their landlord complaints will have to be handled in accordance with the code from the 1st of April. So, landlord complaints, fairly simply, are any council activities that relate to our function as a landlord. Our colleagues in Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services are establishing a small complaint function within local authority housing to manage those complaints. And they've recruited a dedicated complaints manager who will be starting soon, who will put together a policy and a process for them that will meet the requirements of the Social Housing Regulation Act from the 1st of April. What we're intending or hoping that we will be able to do is to bring the two policies in line with each other once we have the outturn from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's consultation, because our expectation is they'll bring the two codes in line and they'll expect us to have one policy. But in the meantime, our housing colleagues need to move slightly faster and put their policy and process in place from the 1st of April, which means we'll have a temporary situation where we have two policies. And we'll just make a small amend to the corporate complaints policy just to refer customers in the interim to the housing landlord complaints policy and process. I appreciate this doesn't sound like an ideal situation. The ombudsman's and their consultation timelines don't tie in with the timelines for the introductions of the legislation. So we're trying to take the most pragmatic approach that we can in the interim to make sure that we're compliant with the legislation, but we don't develop unnecessary policies and processes that are then not compliant with future legislation. I hope that makes some semblance of sense. But
no, thank you very much for that. And I think it's a very good paper explaining it. But just for quiz purposes, are you sure the plural of ombudsman is ombudsmans?
Ombudsi?
Well, ombuds people might be more issue. Do we know what the level of complaints are a minute from now? And what sort of caseload we might have to handle?
So at the moment, our complaint, the number of complaints that relate to local authority housing is about 40–50% of our overall complaint load. So it is quite a significant number of complaints that relate to our tenants, inevitably, because they're providing a service around people's homes, and so of course there are going to be more issues and more things that get reported through the process.
Thank you. Daniel.
Thank you. Is there a cost associated with reviewing these policies? Just because if I know any government consultation, results are often published several months later rather than weeks. So I'm a bit worried that where you're being pragmatic now, the consultation results may not come forward for like 6 months. You only have to look at electric scooters as an example.
No, there's no cost other than staff time to reviewing the policy. So all we've simply done is just put the piece of work that we would have done at the end of last year on hold until we have the outcome of the consultation.
And if that consultation runs on for many months, do you have a set time where you would just review the policy, maybe in 3 months' time if there's no update?
We haven't set a specific time as to when we would move forwards in any case. We have, our corporate complaints officer has a good relationship with the Ombudsman because we deal with Ombudsman complaints, has spoken to them and they have said it is imminent. So they're not saying to us it's going to drag on for months and months, but they're not prepared to give us a specific timeline. So I'm hopeful that it will be quite soon.
Okay. Any members, any questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. And can I ask the members that we note this report? Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we move on to item 7, which is the whistleblowing annual report and policy? Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our annual whistleblowing report and policy. In relation to the policy, we've done an annual review, but there is no changes to the policy. When it comes to whistleblowing cases, we've outlined those in Appendix B. We've had 6 cases in the calendar year, and that is up from 3 cases in the previous year. As with whistleblowing, obviously there's an element of confidentiality and anonymity, so the results are quite sparse in detail, and we obviously can't go into much more detail than that, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah, could I just, I think the one that just jumped out at me was the January 23 Directorate of Adults concerns raised of bullying, and clearly that was investigated, and but the result was additional training rather than disciplinary. Could you tell us a bit more about that one?
Actually, sorry, apologies, that might be better because I have more visibility on that particular one. To explain, it didn't just result in training, but there was a wider piece of work regarding escalating of kind of concerns, visibility on concerns, visibility on behaviours, which is what came through. There were very often with concerns of this nature, there may be grievances and other elements that are already on the table, and in that particular case there was also that to consider. So it's not as light as the grievance and so forth would have seen its normal course of action, but Andy had recognition as a director that perhaps there needed to be additional guidance, perhaps, as opposed to training for how staff should recognise where their support should be and how they could perhaps deal with things of that nature that had been flagged.
Okay, so the outcome bit is a bit of shorthand in a way then. Okay, all right, thank you. Councillor Heaney-Graham.
2 questions really. Just to go back on that point about the table. I mean, I was reading the table and the outcomes, and I recognise you can't put massive amounts of detail in there, but the one at the bottom of the first page, page 81, says audit non-compliance unsubstantiated. It's very clear there was nothing to report about that one that was referred to there. But the others, it's like sort of, well, yes, the complaint was upheld, but only partially, and it would be helpful maybe if we could have the complaint was partially upheld or wholly upheld, so that we get a sense of what it was. Because when you say, and I can understand why council mandated for bullying, because bullying is obviously quite an emotive but also quite serious thing. And when we say additional training, does that mean yes, there was evidence of bullying, i.e. it was upheld, or was it partially upheld, or was it a case of misperception, misunderstanding, maybe people acting hastily or rashly in a way which was then interpreted? I mean, we don't need all that detail, but just to get a sense of upheld, not upheld, partially upheld would possibly be helpful. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that.
No, I think you're right. I think I was trying to get at. I mean, again, yeah. I know you can give as little information as possible on people or whatever, but I think a little bit more, just consider it a bit more information as Graham's outlined.
Okay. My second question was, obviously the policy refers to officers being able to, internal whistleblowing and that, and there's a lot about, in the policy saying about, if you mistakenly do it, you won't be blamed, etc. What I wanted to raise the question was, and it's not in the report, but I don't know whether we consider this, is the question of members being able to do this. Now, I did my training, my induction training 5 years ago, and I've forgotten what was done. I probably would know what to do if I was suspicious about it. I would probably know where to go because I've been involved quite a while in local government. But maybe newer members might not, and I don't know whether we do offer training advice to members about that. And also sometimes we might have a member of the public come to us with an allegation, and we need to know how do we deal with this. Where's the appropriate way to deal with it? Do we go to the service? Should we go to audit? Are members given some advice, training on how to deal with those potential whistleblowing style complaints that might have concerns for themselves or maybe for the public?
Councillor, I'm not entirely certain, and I may lean towards the monitoring officer as to the current format for training for members and whether, because there's probably some in and around governance, correct me if I'm wrong, concerns there potentially isn't, but would you be happy if you left it with us to double check? And I
wasn't expecting an immediate answer.
But we like to give if we can. And I think it's a very salient point, to be honest, regarding if councillors do have concerns. Very often, if councillors have concern regarding how part of the organisation is operating, actually that will filter through to internal audit, or they'll come direct. But formal guidance in and around it, I don't think is there. There is more guidance in relation to members of the public raising concerns, which would be on our website. So if, for example, they thought a neighbour was fraudulently claiming housing benefit, or they observed something and they believed it to be one of our contractors, there are methods and means. A member of the public is never deemed to be a whistleblower because of the legislation, because they're not remunerated. It can only be those contractors and our staff and ourselves. So I think there is reasonable guidance out there for members of the public if they were cognizant enough to look it up on the website. I think we need to probably pick up on the members element. But I will confirm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other points, comments, members? Thank you. Can we then note this report in the attached Appendix A and what further action is required? So you're picking that up from Graham's point. And secondly, the whistleblowing policy Appendix B, where there are no proposed changes. Is that agreed? Thank you. Just on that, because I don't think we've amended the whistleblowing policy since its inception. I was involved in the original drafting of it. So we only asked for it to come here once a year. So we still continue to do that. Yeah, even though we don't seem to get any amendments to it. Okay, fair enough. So still an annual report then. Thank you. Could we move on to 8, please, which is Internal Audit Performance Status Report to the 8th of January 2024. Have I done that? Go, you're right. Look, I'd march it off. Let's save us a bit of time. Sorry, you're right, sorry. 9, sorry, Treasury Management Monitoring Report to the 3rd quarter of 23-24. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I would just highlight the key areas, key points from this report today. For us, it's our Treasury Management quartering as at the end of December 31. We continue to operate within our boundaries. We've taken on no new borrowing. There's been no breaches within Treasury Management, and the Council still has sufficient liquidity to meet our current and future obligations. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. I have no questions or points on this. Any members? No? Thank you. Can we then note the Council's Treasury Management activities to the period up to the 31st of December 2023 as set out in Appendix A, and the actual Treasury Management indicators as at the 31st of December 23 set out in Appendix A. Is that okay, members? Noted? Thank you. Item 10, report to Governance and Audit on complaints received into alleged breaches of the Code of Practice by members of the Council for the calendar year 23.
This report has been prepared by the City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer and is the annual update to advise the committee with regard to the complaints that have been made. You can see from Appendix A that there were 2 complaints dealt with from respective members of the public and one which is a councillor complaint. I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the report.
Thank you very much for that. It's a fairly toothless organisation, isn't it, the complaints procedure? But we have to have one. We've been waiting for years. The government have promised to bring out proper punishments, if that's the word, or ways we could deal with things. So what we do, and we brought up before, so something happens, we ask the members to apologise, and that's it. And we never know if the member's done it. Is that correct?
By and large, the information is contained with the complainant and the member of the public receives the notice. By and large, the information is the City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer does speak to councillors with regards to that. And the fact that there has only been 3 would suggest that actually broadly there is compliance amongst the councillors.
I know people have lost, you know, when we had the national complaints on the standards, people have lost their jobs because the complaints have been put in, but here we just ask for apologies. It's a very difficult one, isn't it? I know at the end of the day, when we call an initial filtering panel together, it's the monitoring officer actually who's making the recommendations or listen to what members have to say.
That's correct. They're guided by the panel that is brought for the initial filtering panel, but ultimately it's the responsibility of the monitoring officer to make that decision.
Well, there's one coming up soon, so I put my name forward for that just to spend an hour. Probably wasting my time, but there you are. Okay, thank you. Can we note the report? Oh, sorry, members, any questions? Sorry, I know I'm rushing because people have given me a time limit, but sorry, Councillor Brian Stewart.
Thanks. Just thinking back to when we've had this report in previous years, I just want to double check, because if my memory serves, in previous years there's been a much higher quantity of complaints on the report. So is there a general trend downwards in the quantity, or is it a one-off occurrence?
It's always difficult to say because you never know on any given year. The demographic of the councillors often has an impact, but also in relation to the work done, I would hope and anticipate that it actually is that compliance is pretty high in regard to the councillors and that you keep on board with the Code of Conduct.
Councillor Williams, Dan.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. So the first one relates to the City Solicitor. As he's the author of this report, I just wonder why he isn't here today.
Unfortunately, Mr. Wolfe is unwell at the moment.
Okay, that's understandable, no problem. In terms of the report, the amount of complaints, I would say it's quite subjective. So in my few years as being a councillor, often there were times where I thought I would make a complaint, but often I would just speak to the councillor first. So it doesn't necessarily seem that it's because people are upholding to the policy. It depends on individual councillors and how they operate. I just have one question as well relating directly to the report. As it's quite a light report on the outcomes, it doesn't actually go into the processes in terms of how a complaint is made and the procedures around it. I just wondered in future if we could have a more substantiated report where obviously names and examples are redacted, but in terms of how the process is made. So if I'm a member of the public, I can actually see, oh, this is how a complaint is done. I can see that this is the time frame, this is who's been involved in terms of, I see, solicitor, not councillors, but how many councillors. I think that'd be quite good just to tell a wider story in terms of what's happened. If that can be happened for next year, that'd be really helpful.
I can certainly take that back.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, members, can we note the report, consider whether any further action is required by them, so thanks to you, Daniel, and place on record the thanks to the independent persons. Is that agreed, members? Agreed, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attendance today. There is another governance and audit sometime in March, I believe. February, is it? Of course, you know more than I do. And is it? All right. I keep a manual diary, so I do lose track sometimes. But thank you all very much and for your